What if everything you've been told about business success is backwards? In this episode, I talk with Alexandra Gonzalez, founder of Savvy Marketers, who made a decision in first quarter 2024 that most business advisors would call reckless. When revenue dried up, she sold personal possessions to make payroll rather than laying off her team. Traditional financial planning would say she's too emotionally invested in her employees. But Alexandra understood something Wall Street won't teach you. Your definition of success should drive your financial strategy, not vice versa. The daughter of Cuban immigrants who arrived in America with only the clothes on their backs, Alexandra learned that work ethic, faith, and resilience matter more than any number in a bank account. After managing multi-billion-dollar businesses at Johnson & Johnson, she left corporate to launch her own firm. If you've ever been told to separate emotions from money decisions, or wondered whether you can afford to build a business that honors your values, this conversation will change how you think about financial success. Listen in.
Welcome to Making Change with Your Money, a podcast that highlights the stories and strategies of women who experienced a big life transition and overcame challenges as they redefined financial success for themselves. Now here's your host, certified financial planner, Laura Rotter.
Welcome, Alexandra, to the Making Change with Your Money podcast.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be with you here today.
Yes, I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm going to start like I always do with the question, Alexandra, what was money like in your family growing up?
Well, it's very interesting because my parents were born in Cuba, so they're Cuban immigrants. They migrated to America only with the clothes they were wearing. So my grandparents had to work very, very hard, and they had to work, my parents, very hard to build their careers, have an education. And that instilled a lot of me in terms of work ethic, integrity, the power of hard work. And, as I was growing up, as a child, my parents got divorced. So I saw my mom going back to school, going to college, doing her master's, her PhD. She became a clinical psychologist. And I knew how hard it was, her sacrifice in going back to school, starting back in her mid-30s from scratch while raising kids. And when she graduated from her PhD, that was a very important moment in my life. I was in my first year of college, and I said, I just want to be like my mom and be able to inspire others. So the one thing that I would say growing up, my parents taught me what it's like to lose everything, the importance of starting from scratch, continuing to stay resilient, continue to reinvent yourself, and the importance of education. Last but not least, the value of hard work. When you have a strong work ethic, no matter the industry, no matter the type of work that you're doing, when you have a strong work ethic, when you're working for the greater good, whatever your job may be, where you have a stronger sense of purpose, you can achieve anything. And that really stood out to me and became my engine to inspire me that, look, we're not going to be $100 bills that everybody's going to like us. Some people may like us, support us, endorse us. Other people may feel threatened by us. It doesn't matter. The important thing is knowing your worth, knowing what you're capable, and having that sense of self-awareness that no matter how many doors close or how dark a night can become, the sun always comes shining in the morning, right? So there's always, every day is a new beginning. And that's what I like to teach others as well. And no matter if you're, you know, an entrepreneur, no matter if you're leading in a role, or no matter if you are a follower, but really having that self awareness, that knowledge of what you can do and how we all have a sense of power. And no one can take that away from us.
What a beautiful way to start our conversation, Alexandra. And um, it's already bringing up the question to me. You talked about purpose. Um, when I think of your parents and specifically your mother and what she passed along, was there a deep faith? I mean, was that part of her purpose? Because I sort of hear implicit in how we started this conversation a sense of there's something bigger than us that
Oh,
drives.
absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I think that without faith, right, regardless of religion or religious beliefs, without faith, there's no sense of purpose of doing anything in life, right? We need to believe in something bigger, that there is a greater sense of purpose. If not, why are we here, right? Why do we love? Why do we suffer? Why do we struggle? Why do we have to learn? Why do we have to become better, right? So having a strong sense of faith was something that I grew up with. And definitely having that bigger sense of purpose, that there's something bigger, that there is something that I have to do to serve not only myself as a human being, but also my communities and others, right? We're all citizens of the same planet, no matter the language that we speak, the country that we're coming from, our religious beliefs or non-religious beliefs. We're all citizens of the same planet, and we're all human in nature, and we all have something in common in our DNA. I remember when I was in college just thinking about this, and I took this class in biology, and I was studying marketing, and this was before my MBA, and they were explaining the DNA structure, that what separates a human being versus a particular animal or a tree is the order of that DNA structure. And I was so fascinated because something bigger had to create this, right? And we're all interconnected, right? We're interconnected with nature, with everything that is surrounding us, and that's also very inspiring, because also it takes me to, hey, you can't just think about yourself, you can't just live in silos. Everything that you do is going to have an impact in others. As a leader, not only with your employees, but with your customers, with communities, with consumers in general, right? This is not only about politics. This is not only about economic guardrails or economic circumstances. We all have a say, and we're all impacted by any action. So keeping that in mind and having that sense of awareness that whatever I, Alexandra, decide to do is going to have an impact in others, not only my spouse, my children, my employees, but others, it's important to know.
I love the fact that the theme that you're already building is a sense of giving back and being part of a larger whole. How is that modeled for you by your mother?
Well, it was very powerful because my mom always has had such a strong sense of purpose of giving back to others,
Really?
not only being active, at church or in her neighborhood, but also with her patients, with communities. And, both my parents, my dad he's an architect and engineer, but he's in the entertainment industry in Hollywood. I always told me, look, I know that as a marketer, you love filmmaking. My family's in the industry, in the Hollywood industry. But my dad always said it's a very superficial industry, right? It's not it's not just about talent, unfortunately. And he always tried to shy me away from that or shelter me out of that. So both my parents instill the importance of education, the importance of developing your own talents, right? And always learning something new. But also, more importantly, is the repercussions of your actions, right? So, whatever you decide, make sure that you're thinking long term about the implications, not only for you, but for others. And we're living in a world now that is in so much uncertainty. I see the world right now, and because I do a lot of market research, and for me, consumer centricity is at the core of everything that I do as a marketer and as an entrepreneur at Savvy Marketers. But one thing is, imagine that we're on this plane. The control tower knows the winds of change, right? What is the right altitude that that pilot should be navigating and why? How do we get to point A to point B, which are, our goal, right? That destination for us to then land. So it's not only landing safely, but how do you navigate those winds of change? And I feel that now, as human beings, and not only in the United States, of course, this is what's triggering it,
Yeah.
but it's creating a huge domino effect to the world because we're in this plane that it's like one day it's this, one day it's that, and there's a lot of turbulence. So, what I say to people is stay resilient. Don't lose sight of the big picture. And the big picture, it's not a political party, it's not a political person or a president here or there. It's more about what you as an individual can do. The morals, the values, the things that are important and relevant, what keeps you awake at night, what is meaningful for you and your family, and what will help better you and your communities, right? So I say to people, don't lose sight of the big picture, right? Because this is important. And with your former Wall Street experience as well, there's so much uncertainty, but we need to stay focused on what's important to each of us for a greater sense of good. And last but not least, how do we stay resilient that despite those winds of change, let's look at the glass half full instead of half empty. And let's try to focus on the positive without neglecting what's happening, without ignoring what's happening around us. But how do we stay resilient? Because I think that as a nation, as human beings, as a democracy, that's crucial now more than ever.
Thank you for that. And I can see that you can be like a stabilizing force in your client's life, in your belief system. And I too, when I work with clients, it's so important for me, and it's where I'm really steering my business to start the work with an understanding of what really motivates them. Like you said, the values that you hold, that your mother holds, of church, of responsibility, of community. And that's what the money is for, to actualize those values and to keep your eye on that. And as you said, Alexandra, not all the turbulence. And personally, I can see you're a woman that probably has a gratitude practice, but get up every day and say, I have a warm house. I have a meal on the table. When I turn the spigot, hot water comes out. I have friendships. I have meaningful work. And yes, there's a lot of crap going on in the world. And at the same time, there's a lot of good people and a lot of good effort going on.
It's very interesting what you're saying because I was watching not too long ago something on reality TV, and they were interviewing a celebrity who's very multifaceted, very diverse, actor, director, producer, an icon in the 1980s and 90s, Sylvester Stallone. And
Ah,
in one
yes.
of the interviews, they were asking him, what do you think is the most important thing to you? And for him, what he feels most gratitude, it's not only his family, but also the things that he has lost along the way. Because he says, the most thing that I value, the thing that never comes back is time. And that is so true. And when we're thinking as entrepreneurs, especially women, we feel this sense of guilt because we're wives, we're mothers, or we feel that we can't do it all, or because we're putting so much time and effort to work, right? Or to launch a business, build a business, keep the business going, or keep the business surviving, right? Um, we feel this sense of guilt of where is this balance? What happened with balance? And I think that for me that was an eye opener because it's true. As women, we judge ourselves even more because we think, oh, I spend so much time at work, but this is my business. I'm so passionate about it. How do I navigate, or how do you navigate, taking care of your children, it's spending time with your children? And I say it's about balance, but balance is not about the quantity of time, but the quality of time. And you brought something up that I feel very empathetic because as a woman of faith, I pray, right? Every morning, every night. And having that sense of gratitude because we're the worst judges when we look at ourselves in a mirror, right? We're trying to pinpoint every single defect, right? Things that people wouldn't see, we see, right? We're the worst judges of ourselves. And I think that women, the vast majority of women, myself included, overjudge ourselves, right? And put so much on our shoulders. But having and seeing, having the time to smell the flowers, having time to look outside and say, what a beautiful day, and saying, oh my gosh, I have a brand new start. I'm healthy. I can do this. Having that sense of gratitude for health is so important. So self care has to, be a priority for us women leaders or women entrepreneurs. It has to be very important. And don't think, oh, I have to exercise X number of hours or X number of times every day, or meditate or do this or do that. It's not about the quantity or how much time I spend with my kids or how much time I'm dedicating to work or number of meetings or writing emails or writing proposals or presenting. It's about the quality. And that's something that I have instilled in my three daughters. I happen to have three daughters, and I've always taught them never take no for an answer. You always have the final say on things. And, not everyone is going to like you, but always do the right thing, especially when no one is watching. That for me is vital. Teaching that to my daughters. Work hard, always learn something new, never take anything for granted, and always have gratitude towards others and, of course, to God.
Beautifully said. Alexandra, this is a podcast about women who've been through a life transition and came through the other side. And I know you were not always an entrepreneur. What was that? You've already talked about your daughters. And so, can you please share your story of what that life-defining moment was for you that led you perhaps to seek more balance, as you're talking about?
Thank you. And that's a great question because I always saw myself, as a marketer, business person, I grew very fast in all the industries that I worked in as a marketer. And, I worked in the banking industry, marketing. I worked in the food industry. Then I worked in consumer packaged goods. Then I went to e-commerce and private equity before I started my own business. And I always had a reputation when something's not possible, Alex can make it happen.
Love
And
it.
I actually built a reputation at Johnson and Johnson. And I managed multi-billion dollar businesses. I went from managing markets to regions to then the world. And I was typically the youngest in the room. So I had to always, as a woman, as a young woman with a career, I had to work and be the hardest working person in the group. And, I've always been very proud of that. That's part of my work ethic. I'm a workaholic and I say it proudly. But always focus on under promising, but always over delivering. So maybe the under promising, it's not something that you're really under promising. You know what you're going to deliver, but always deliver beyond that. And that was part of what people knew me. That was my reputation. And I always saw myself in the corporate world. I was very comfortable, very happy where I was. And I was very close to my two grandmothers. And they passed away 4 weeks apart. One had Parkinson's, the other one had rheumatoid arthritis and developed it in her 80s. So it was, it took a real toll. And I was very close to them. And after they passed away, something changed in me. And a week later, after my second grandmother, who I happened to be the closest to, she was my mom's mom. A week later, I was pregnant and I knew it. I've always known my body, and I already had a daughter. She was 14 months old. And we traveled to California, and I decided to go and buy a pregnancy test. And it's Christmas Eve, first thing in the morning. I just finished nursing my baby, and I go to the bathroom. I don't say anything. And in a second, he said that I was pregnant. And I felt in every part of my body, think about faith, in every part of my body, that my grandmothers were sending me to angels from heaven. So I go to my husband. I said, I cannot explain it, but I know that my grandmothers are sending us to angels from heaven, and we're having twins. And my husband believed me, right? He was like, oh my gosh, did you smoke or drink anything? I said, well, I don't do any of those. I just know. I cannot explain it. I just know. So throughout my pregnancy, I get confirmation that I was pregnant, that I was having twins. My due date was my birth date. So
Oh,
I knew all of these things. I knew that I was going to have daughters. But halfway through my pregnancy, the doctors find that they're identical twins. So twin B, that's how they're called, twin A or twin B, that twin B was 38% smaller than twin A. So all the doctors tell me, hey, if they develop twin to twin syndrome, one is going to die and the other one is going to have brain damage. So we recommend you that you abort. I said, but are they okay? Yes, for now. And I said, well, if they're okay, I'm literally all they've got because they're inside of me. I could be okay and I could walk down the street in Princeton, get hit by a car, and that's it. Bye bye. Right? So if I'm all they've got and they're okay for now, I gotta fight for them. So that brought a bigger sense of purpose in my life.
hmm.
And, I never stopped working. I was working around the clock, nonstop. While I was pregnant with them, I would go to twice a week, 3-hour ultrasounds to the best hospitals, including Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I knew every blood vessel of each of my twins. I saw them develop. Then they put me on steroids, hospitalized. I gained 50 pounds in 2 days where I didn't have skin. You can imagine what that did to me, but I didn't care. It developed their lungs. So when it was time to give birth, they were born on July 14th, La Bastille Day, the day of the French Revolution. And I wrote them a letter on my way to the hospital. I wrote them a letter and I said to them how much what my grandmothers instilled in me, how they brought them to me, and how I was going to honor them, giving them the first letter of each of my grandmother's name to each of them, and the names that I was giving. Diara, Chloe. Diara means gift in Thai. Chloe, from God, gift from God. That was twin B, the one that they asked me to abort. And they asked me to abort 24 times. I fired all of my doctors. And look, I'm all about empowerment. The women have the right to choose. It's your body. But I felt that if I needed to fight for them, I was going to fight for them to the very end. If it would have been my life at risk or there was no way out, it would have been a different story. But I'm glad that I had that decision upon myself, that I had that choice. So important for us to have that choice. But I wrote that to them. And my other twin A, Oriana Stella, star in the center of the universe. So I was, writing to them how I felt that they had to live a great life, that no matter the time that they would live or how much time they would have to live, to make the most of it. And that I was setting an example to them. And I basically kept that letter because I want them to read it throughout their life. And look, after they were born, they were in the NICU. They had some ups and downs, but they were able to thrive. Looking back 13 years from after, they're healthy, they're fantastic, they're great girls, very talented, funny. They're in the honor roll, but they're good girls. And after I went through that, and after leaving the NICU, I relocated from New Jersey to California because I was working in e-commerce. And I go to a board meeting. I present my 5-year strat plan. They approve it in 30 minutes. Very different to the corporate world that you have to have iterations or they go back and forth in budgets, etc. But I had everything bulletproof. And I come back from my board meeting back to LA and my husband asked me, so how did it go? I said, look, I think that I've done everything that I needed to do. I've expanded in less than 9 months in 60 countries. I am quadrupling the business in less than 5 years, have done a couple of acquisitions. I think now it's time for me to do something different. And he said, what is that? And I said, I want to be a mom, but I also want to bring value to other companies at my own time, on my own terms. He said, okay, well, if you do that, why would you name it? I said, Savvy Marketers. And my husband he gave me a big smile and said, go for it. So going through all that turbulence, fighting so much for my daughters, fighting against the system, the doctors, being afraid of having a lawsuit, wanting to make sure that everything was all right. What inspired me to launch Savvy Marketers? And this is my other baby. And look, my heart, my soul, my savings, my blood, my tears, my sweat here into this business. But looking back, I wouldn't have done it any other way. Things happen for a reason. If I would have thought 20 years ago that I would have my own business, I probably would have said, no way, that's not happening. But look, things happen in our lives that, get us to open up, open our eyes, discover new things. And I'm grateful for that.
You are not the sum of your earnings. You are the sum of your yearnings. If you're ready to use wealth to create more freedom and flexibility, let's align your finances with what matters most. Together, we'll build a plan that balances your scarce resources of energy, time, and money, so you move forward with clarity, confidence, and less stress towards a life of true abundance. Learn more at www.trueabundanceadvisors.com and schedule a short conversation. very inspiring story. And my question for you, Alex, is were there any financial parameters that you considered when you made this decision, or any money curveballs that came up? Any lessons you could share with our listeners about how money played a role in this decision?
Well, the first thing is I first did it on my own, starting in my home. I launched Savvy Marketers. I had the website. I developed a few certifications. And then I started to go to my network, right? And I went to a former boss of mine who was the chairman of Merck Consumer Care that later was acquired by Bayer and became Bayer Consumer. And I was invited to come and put together a presentation, a proposal for a program, and they approved it right there. I didn't sleep that night. I even worked on a video. I had never worked or done a video myself. I just felt so inspired, and it got me the deal. And it was almost $400,000.
Wow.
And I told my husband, I said, I'm literally in business. Now I have to hire people, etc. And that opened the doors for a lot of opportunity. And I self-funded my business. So that meant that at first I was working from my home. I started building a team little by little. First, they were not employees, they were freelancers. Until then, I hired employees. I then opened offices. I first had smaller offices, about 35 square feet of offices with 5 innovation labs. Then I moved 3 years later to bigger offices where I am today. I've been almost 9 years in these offices where I have over 8,000 square feet, 10 innovation labs located in a corporate building in Princeton. Really cool, very innovative. But what I can tell you is it takes a lot of courage, but you
Certainly
have to build
does.
a financial plan. The one thing is depends it depends on the business and the industry that you're tapping into. But for me, I work with a lot of corporate clients, which means the bigger the company, the worse they pay. They will always pay. It takes longer periods of time. That means that you have to think about your cash flow. You have to think about those ongoing expenses from paying rent, utilities, payroll biweekly, healthcare if you offer it to your employees, which I do. So, how do you manage your cash flow is crucial. Do you have to do it all at the same time? Absolutely not. I did it in phases. As I started to build more solid business, that's how I continue to expand little by little. Now, with employees, with having offices comes a lot of responsibility, financial responsibility. So you have to be very smart, and you have to also, you can't risk not losing a client, right? So you have to adapt to their payment terms. But majority of companies are 90 days, 120 days. The minimum is 60 days. So how do you overcome that? When you have to pay others for their time, right? You have to pay yourself too, right? Or manage your own expenses. So you have to mitigate that and balance that through. So for me, because we're a full end-to-end marketing firm, a boutique agency, the way that I do it is market research helps us get a lot of ongoing projects that are short term. That means that probably our payment terms are 30 to 60 days versus other bigger projects that could be 90 or 120 days. So navigating that helps keep our cash flow going from doing creative work or video development. Those are, smaller projects, but it helps the business. It helps balance that cash flow. So, what I would say to your listeners and viewers is be very purposeful in the business that you want to get in. Be very mindful of what do I want to achieve in a year from now? Do I still see myself keeping my business 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, or over 5 years from now? What guardrails do I have to consider? What sacrifices beyond my time, beyond my my time, my life, do I have to take into consideration financially? Because I think that if we consider it that way, it's going to be much more helpful along the way, right? Because we have to plan that journey. And let me tell you, just because I've been in business over 13 years doesn't mean that there are years that things aren't better than others. I could tell you that during the pandemic, because we're very innovative, we use a lot of technology. We have been in AI since 2017. Now people are all about AI. We've been with that for now almost 8 years. So imagine we're that's why we're savvy marketers. But I can tell you, during the pandemic, our clients supported us and we were prepared. And I think of that as a blessing in disguise because during the pandemic, those first 2 years were some of the best years that we've had in the business, thanks to that. But I can tell you also, 2024 was a really tough year, especially the first quarter, because a lot of companies no longer had any COVID benefits. And I'm talking big corporate America, big companies. I cannot name the companies themselves, but some are $4 trillion corporations, right? And those are very few companies that carry that financial wealth, right, in the world. And many, because they no longer had COVID benefits, they were reducing headcounts, getting out of hybrid mode. So a lot of projects got delayed or canceled or postponed. So the first quarter for me was terrible. But that's where my purpose came to play, where I said, okay, when you go through troubles at home, either a job loss, do you fire your kids? No, you adjust, you prioritize. So I didn't fire anybody. I adjusted accordingly. And that meant big sacrifices for me. Maybe it meant selling things that I had of value so I could keep payroll going for the time being.
Wow.
And you know what? I am proud of doing that. I did it. Others would have gotten rid of employees. I had clients who told me that I was too invested in my employees. I said, how dare you say that? Of course, I'm too invested with my employees. They're members of my family. They're an extension of who I am. I hired them. This is my business, and it matters. So I am proud of that. And look, do people leave or can leave? Of course. Are people going to be have more gratitude than others? Absolutely. But will that change who I am? Absolutely not. So yes, I did sell a couple of things that were of value to me, but that I felt they're just material things. Why not? Keeping my team employed and making payroll, making rent is more important. And then, the second quarter got better, the third quarter got better, and the fourth quarter was stable. So that helped me carry on. So I share that with your listeners and viewers because don't think that every year is going to be the same, right? I know that we're right now in a lot of financial uncertainty. Jamie Dimon said, there's a 60% chance that we're going into recession. And I don't doubt that we're going to go to a recession. But you know what? A lot of people thrive during a recession. Like a lot of people were able to thrive during the pandemic. So don't lose sight of your purpose, of that big idea, of that new solution that you have in mind. Don't lose sight of the big picture because there could be a great opportunity out there. And look, maybe what you thought would work in the US market, but maybe it's going to work in another market. So go after that other market. I am certainly doing that. We're a global business, but one market that I've been putting a lot of effort, doing research, doing a lot of work is in the Middle East because there's a lot of money in the Middle East, right? So I share that with your listeners and viewers because don't just think about the short term because the short term gain can equal a long term loss. And equally, it could equal a long term loss because then it became a missed opportunity or you became afraid. don't don't lose sight of what's important. Don't lose sight of that opportunity. I could look at businesses like Bubbly, this woman that decided, traditional sodas were too sugary. She wanted to focus something more natural, and she created this great line, Bubbly. Pepsi acquired it for over $2 billion, I think 2.6 billion. And it's a woman that did it in her own home, married with two young children. So anything is possible. A big food and beverage company acquired them because they saw the value behind the brand, right? Think of brands like Spanx and others that are out there built by women that have been very successful. Now, does every business need to be a multi-billion? Absolutely not. Niches are important. So keep those things in mind, but you have to be very clear what you want and think about it not only in the now, but in a year from now, in 3 years from now, in 5 years from now, and keep challenging yourselves. Every day I learn something new and I instill that with my team. I bring new technologies, new offerings. Yes, it's investment, but you have to calibrate. Is that investment going to bring more value to my business? Is that investment going to show us in a different way? And is that way better? Are those investments going to make us more efficient and effective? And that's how you should approach it. And that's how I approach it. And one last thing that I would say when it comes to AI, look, I'm all about AI from a neuroscience standpoint because I instill that and I use that in research. And that's why we were named one of the top 5 most disruptive companies at the forefront of innovation in the United States. However, when I look at generative AI serves great benefits if used right. And I'm going to give you a great example. When you probe generative AI, but you have to be very mindful of what you're probing, what you're asking, because machine learning learns with you along the way, right? So if you have, let's say, a ChatGPT, an OpenAI account that you're paying $20 a month, you have access to over 100 different ChatGPTs. So that gives you a lot of power, but you have to probe accordingly. Because if you ask something that the probe was not that good, the answer is not going to be that good. Also, keep in mind that AI does make a lot of mistakes. So keep challenging it. Go back to your data, make sure it's this. I remember that it wasn't this, so challenge it. So for that, it does help you be more efficient and effective of your time. So kudos to those that are utilizing it that way. However, if you're going to launch your own business and you're thinking of a logo, of a tagline, of an image, look, OpenAI, Gemini, there's so many out there. And of course, you got DeepSeek, the Chinese one. Be very careful because there's one thing that AI, when you ask for creativity, it could inspire you, and that's great. But whatever you put creatively, it's not trademarked. It's not protected. So as you think about your business, a tagline, a visual, a logo, use that as inspiration, but don't use it as the final one because you won't be able to trademark it. And what AI is giving you is going to give to anybody else that asks for it. So keep that in mind.
So, a lot of advice you just went through there. I want to highlight that you went back to the values that were passed on to you by your parents. I heard resilience. I heard hard work. I heard continuous learning. And of course, I heard purpose. I'm going to end with a question that relates to purpose. I do also want to stress, as you did, cash flow. Because people come to me, I have an inheritance, invest my money. People think financial advisors, it's just about the investments. And they're almost surprised that I am not going to invest anyone's money until I understand what's coming in, and what's going out. And are you going to need to use some of this capital as you're building your business, as you're growing your family? In which case, we would invest it very differently than money that's not going to be needed for the next decade. And so, cash flow is in not only an intrinsic part of a financial plan, but it's almost the elementary part of the financial plan. So I loved hearing you, Alex, talk about how conscious you were about the money you needed as you started the business and not, what's the term, getting out ahead of your skis, like building in keeping with what your financial resources were. So thank you for that important lesson.
And I
Um,
would say, just to build on what you're saying, as entrepreneurs or as investors, let's say you came with an inheritance or you decide, hey, I have this money saved up. I want to launch a business or a side gig, whatever it may be. I would say that when you're on your own, you not only have to think about short term, mid-term, and long term from a cash flow perspective, but you also need to think about, if I am the owner and the sole proprietor of this business and something were to happen to me, do I have money saved thinking about health? Right? Because there could be moments where you won't be necessarily able to stay active in the business for a while as you're recovering, as you're getting treatment, etc. And look, that's why I say health is so important. Self-care is so important because as entrepreneurs, we don't tend to care as much about our health as we should and as we must. So when you're thinking about it, and just as you were mentioning, as you navigate and you start asking questions to your clients, right, that they want you to invest their money, you want to know what's coming in, what's going out, you know and what are you going to keep for those moments where maybe it's going to be thinner, it's going to be less, right? So keep that in mind, right? And I don't say it for people to be scared. It's just that the only thing that we know in life, after once we're alive, is that one day we're going to die, right? So I'm not saying it to scare people or anything like that, but just make sure that you're living the most in every moment, but make sure that you're also being very mindful when times of trouble take place or come. It could be a surprise, that you're also financially prepared, right? That's very important for you, and it's very important for your loved ones.
yes, the only constant in life, as we know, is change. And so, as we come to the end of our conversation, Alex, I like to ask, you've been through ups and downs in the business, you've seen change. How has your definition of success shifted over this time? And perhaps how has your definition of financial success shifted?
Oh, it has shifted a lot. I would say that success is not an award. Success is continuing to do what you love to do and being able to do it. That for me is my definition of success. That I've been a marketer for almost 30 years of my life, that I've been an entrepreneur for over 13 years of my career, that I wake up every day to do things that I really love to do. That for me defines success. That I am healthy, that I have a family, that I feel blessed, that I have a great team, that I have good clients, good people that I'm surrounded, that I work with. That inspires me. That for me is a measure of success. It's not the number of clients, it's not the number of awards or recognitions, but really loving what you do and being able to do it, right? That I'm utilizing my talent for something greater, right? And I would say from a financial standpoint, look, it's not about how much money you bring to the bank every month. because every month it could be different, right? Especially depending on the industry, depending on clients, depending on projects. I'm just speaking in the nature of my business, right? That it's not necessarily retainers. You have short-term projects. You may have X number of projects one month, other projects another month. Then things could slow down and then it comes back up, right? So for me, it's more about are you able to keep doing and keep living the way that you live, right? Is that if you can do that, that's great. And then do you have moments that you can pamper yourself? For me, it's about traveling. I'm a world traveler. I've been all over the world. And I try to go once a year as far away as possible in the world with my family and see a place, whether it's Israel, whether it's Australia or New Zealand, whether it's Dubai, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Brazil, anywhere in the world. And for me, is being able to do that, for me, is the ultimate joy.
Mm.
And do I do it every year? Every year I'm going to go one place as far away as possible. And to be able to do that for me also shows me, hey, I was able to plan financially to do this while also covering all of my costs, right? While also saving a little here or there. Keep that in mind because for me, that for me defines also and gives me a sense of joy and happiness.
And I see it in your face. Alex, this has been such a pleasure to get to know you, to get to know what's important to you, to hear the passion in your voice when you talk about your family, when you talk about your business. And I just want to thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. And if anybody would like to connect or any questions, feel free to reach out. Savvymarketers.com,
It will
savvy-marketers.com.
be in the show notes.
But also on LinkedIn, Alexandra Gonzalez, Savvy Marketers. I'll be delighted to help anybody that has, any questions or seeks advice. Why not?
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Making Change with Your Money. Certified financial planner Laura Rotter specializes in helping people just like you organize, clarify, and invest their money in order to support a life of purpose and meaning. Go to www.trueabundanceadvisors.com/workbook for a free resource to help you on your journey. Disclaimer, please remember that the information shared by this podcast does not constitute accounting, legal, tax, investment, or financial advice. It's for information purposes only. You should seek appropriate professional advice for your specific information.